Hello, my name is Wes Walsh from Massasoit Community College, here to present my research on pollinator composition and trends in Plymouth County, Massachusetts. When discussing insect pollinators, we typically talk about bees. And while bees are the most effective per visit to a flower at picking up and depositing pollen, we find that non-bee insects tend to make more visits to flowers, to the point where these two factors even out, and non-bee insect pollinators offer services similar to those of bees. Non-bee insect pollinators also typically have wider flight ranges, rely less on natural habitat, and have young that are not reliant on floral resources. These differences could cause non-bee insect pollinators to respond differently to urbanization than bees. This is important given the concern that urbanization is causing a decline in bees. Non-bee insect pollinators may be less vulnerable to urbanization and could act as insurance against bee declines. Or non-bee insect pollinators could react negatively to urbanization, but in a different way than bees and require unique conservation efforts tailored to their needs. Or perhaps all pollinators respond similarly and negatively to urbanization, in which case a decline in bees may be indicative of an overall decline in insects, with even more serious consequences for the environment. For these reasons, I decided to investigate the abundances of different pollinator groups and their responses to natural and anthropogenic factors on an urban to rural gradient. I included insect orders that had been established as pollinators in multiple literature sources. The first order I included was Hymenoptera, which I limited to bees and wasps, and I separated these two groups so we could compare bees from non-bees. I also included Diptera, which is flies, Lepidoptera, which is moths and butterflies, and Coleoptera, beetles. This study used bycatch from a larger bee monitoring program that's been going on since 2016. Since that time, we've kept a record of the lump sum of non-bees that we caught in our sweep nets, although we did not identify them. This past summer, we kept and identified the non-bee insects we caught in our pan traps and sweep nets bi-weekly from April till November. After the first summer, here's what I found. I found the majority of insect pollinators we sampled were non-bees. About 66% were flies, 16% bees, 11% wasps, and 6% beetles, and just around 1% of moths and butterflies. For reference, this is an average of 692 flies versus 169 bees caught bi-weekly. Given their effectiveness and their abundance, it's likely that non-bee insect pollinators play an important role in the pollination in our area. Furthermore, at 4 of our 6 sampling sites, around 71 to 76% of the pollinators sampled there were flies. The two exceptions to this were our least urbanized site and our most urbanized site. At both sites, we found a notably smaller proportion of flies in the 30% area. We also saw a larger percentage of bees, also within the 30% range. I next looked at the abundance of different groups over the sampling season. First, we have moths. We caught very few, so it's difficult to identify any trends, although it does seem that we caught the same small amount throughout the season. We have a similar case with beetles, where we caught very few, so it's difficult to identify any real trends. However, it does seem that we caught a stable amount, though very small, throughout the season. Wasps seem to be most abundant in mid to late summer, trailing off as fall began. Bees had a similar trend, being most abundant in mid to late summer, which makes sense given both bees and wasps are in the order Hymenoptera. Finally, flies were present throughout the season, and we saw spikes in abundance around every 3 weeks. Throughout the season, there appeared to be multiple pollinator groups present, which may be good news for plants that only bloom in a specific time during the season. Should one group decline, there is likely other pollinator groups present that could make up for lost services. However, when I compared insect abundance with percent impervious ground cover, which we use as a proxy for urbanization, I found that with the exception of moths, all pollinators sampled were negatively correlated with imperviousness. Of those affected, bees had the weakest correlation, so it's possible that these insects to which we had been paying less attention are more impacted by urbanization than bees. Finally, as I mentioned in the beginning, although we had not been keeping and identifying them, we do have a record of the lump sum of other insects that we caught while sweep netting since the beginning of this study. Here's a correlation between the abundances of bee and non-bees caught each year. We see a very strong positive correlation, which suggests that overall bee and non-bee abundances follow similar trends, and it's likely that any changes in bee abundance are indicative of an overall trend in pollinators. The main takeaways after 1 year were that a large portion of the insect pollinators in our area were non-bees, and they likely play an important role in this area's pollination. There also appeared to be multiple pollinator types present throughout the season, which could be good for plant resiliency. However, comparing the abundances of different groups against urbanization and comparing overall trends in abundance between bees and non-bees, we found that both groups follow very similar trends. So it's possible that reported declines in bees are simply part of a larger overall insect decline. Given their prevalence and potentially important contributions to pollination, it's important to include non-bee insects in bee monitoring programs moving forward, especially since it's possible that these groups are even more negatively impacted by urbanization, and it would be important to identify ways to mitigate the negative effects of urbanization on these groups. On a positive note, because there does appear to be such a close relationship between bee and non-bee insect pollinator abundance, it's likely that conservation efforts put in place to protect bees benefit non-bee insect pollinators as well. However, it's also likely that things that negatively impact bees negatively impact all insect pollinators, which means there's even more serious consequences for the environment. I want to thank all of the faculty, staff, and interns who made this project possible, as well as our various sources of funding. If you'd like to learn more about Massasoit STEM, you can follow the QR code below and follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram.